Okay, so get ready because today we're going deep on a case that really makes you think about memory and, the possibility of mistaken identity.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
We're talking about Bobby Buckner, a man who says he was wrongly convicted of a crime he didn't commit. And what makes this case even more interesting is that there's another Bobby in the story.
Really?
Someone who might actually hold the key
Yeah.
to, understanding what really happened.
Wow, so like a key witness or something?
We've got a ton of documents to go through, court transcripts, personal letters from Buckner himself, and even the super interesting school record.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like official records.
Yeah, and as we go through all of this, I want you to think about this question. Is it possible that Ashley, the victim in this case, might have actually myth-identified her abuser?
Hmm, that's a tough question. It makes you think about how reliable eyewitness testimony really is, especially with, childhood trauma and just time passing.
Exactly. So let's start from the beginning.
Okay, so where do we begin?
Buckner's story starts in Texas, back in 2000. He met Sonia Lopez, and they dated for about 3 months.
Okay. And did Sonia have any kids?
She did. Sonia had a young daughter named Ashley, who was mostly living with her grandmother, Margaret.
Oh, so not with her mom.
Right, and Buckner describes kind of a, complicated family dynamic.
Yeah.
Margaret wasn't really a fan of him.
Interesting. I see. So maybe some tension there.
Yeah, and Buckner even mentions some racially charged comments from Margaret.
Oh, wow. So their relationship was strained from the get-go.
Yeah, and this is important because it might have played a role in what happened later.
Right. Setting the stage.
Now, fast forward to 2008. Buckner is living in Missouri trying to rebuild his life when all of a sudden he gets arrested
Arrested for what?
for aggravated sexual assault.
Whoa, that's serious.
Yeah, and this charge came from allegations made by Ashley Lopez, who claimed that Buckner abused her back in 2000 when she was just 7 years old.
So 8 years later.
It-
Now, for our listeners out there, the term aggravated sexual assault might not be totally clear. I mean, it's a very serious form of sexual assault, often involving a minor, and it carries a heavy penalty.
Yeah, so this is the charge that put Buckner behind bars.
I see.
Now, Buckner says he was completely blindsided by this accusation.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be shocking.
He was adamant that he wasn't even in Texas when the alleged abuse happened.
So wait, he's saying he has an alibi?
Yeah, he had already moved to Missouri by November of 2000.
So he's saying it's impossible he could have committed the crime.
Right, it's a classic alibi defense.
But, proving an alibi in court takes some serious evidence.
Definitely. And that brings us to the trial. The prosecution relied heavily on Ashley's testimony.
Which can be difficult, with childhood memories, especially after so much time has passed.
Yeah, and there's this psychological concept called suggestibility. Children's memories, especially those around traumatic events, can be influenced by things like leading questions or suggestions.
Right, so it's not always as clear-cut as we might think.
And Buckner remembers this very specific detail about Ashley. At the trial, she wore gloves the whole time.
Gloves, like why?
She said it was to cover self-harm scars.
Oh, wow. She attributed those to the trauma of the abuse.
Right.
So it's like this small detail, but it raises all these questions like, why did she need to cover them? Was it just, self-consciousness, or was there something else going on? Could it tell us something about, her state of mind?
Yeah, and Buckner claims that Ashley had behavioral issues and was self-harming even before he knew the family.
So he's saying it's unrelated to him.
Right, he even has school records to back it up.
So did the prosecution even look into other explanations for Ashley's distress?
It's a good question, and this is where the story takes this crazy turn. Buckner was in solitary, going over his case files, and he found something that changed everything.
What was it?
A school record for Ashley, and it said Robert A. Lopez, Bobby, was not allowed to pick her up from school.
Wait a minute, another Bobby.
This wasn't just some random Bobby, though. This
Yeah.
was Ashley's uncle who lived with her and her grandmother.
Okay, so we've got two Bobbies now, both connected to Ashley.
Yeah, and Buckner starts putting the pieces together, the shared name, living in the same house. And then get this, Uncle Bobby was later convicted of aggravated sexual assault of a child.
Oh my gosh, so the same crime.
Exactly. And Ashley, Jesus calls her abuser Bobby. Could this be a case of mistaken identity?
That's what Buckner wants us to consider. He thinks maybe because of the trauma or time passing or even, influence from her family, Ashley might have gotten the two Bobbies mixed up in her memory.
And Buckner says this information about Uncle Bobby was super important for his defense, but his lawyers didn't seem interested in following up on it.
Really? That seems strange.
Yeah, and he believes that Sonia Ashley's mother might have known the truth, but was pressured to keep quiet by her own mother, Margaret, who we know was a key witness for the prosecution.
Wow. So he feels like he's trapped knowing this important information, but nobody's listening.
Exactly. And before we get into, Sonia and Margaret's involvement, let's take a closer look at the evidence Buckner presents to support this idea of mistaken identity.
Okay, so let's look at the timelines and, Ashley's testimony and that school record to see if Buckner's argument holds up.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we're back in the thick of things with Bobby Buckner's case. And remember, we're focusing on this question of, could Ashley have misidentified her abuser?
Right. Could she have mistaken Buckner for her Uncle Bobby?
Exactly. And let's try to, sort this timeline out, because Buckner's claim is that he wasn't even in Texas when all of this supposedly went down.
Right. He says he was already living in Missouri.
Yeah, he was in Missouri by November 2000. He really emphasizes that he left Texas with basically nothing.
Like what? Just the clothes on his back?
A few $100, some clothes, a couple of tools. He was looking for a fresh start. Wanted to get away from the drugs and trouble back in Texas.
Makes sense.
He even met his future wife while he was living in Missouri.
Oh, wow. So he was starting over.
Yeah, really trying to turn his life around.
So if Buckner's telling the truth, he couldn't have been in Texas when the abuse happened. He was hundreds of miles away building a new life.
Right, but, claims of innocence need more than just words. They need some solid evidence, right?
Proof. Yeah.
And Buckner does try to give some specifics to back up his timeline. He mentions a specific date, September 28th. He helped Sonia move a couch.
Oh, wow. Why does he remember that?
Because it was his future wife's birthday, and, she never let him forget that he came home late that night.
Oh, I see. So it's like one of those little details that sticks in your mind.
Exactly. It's tied to an emotional event. Those little mental snapshots. We all have those memories that are burned in because they meant something.
Right.
It does make you wonder, if Buckner was making all of this up, why would he include a detail like that?
That could be checks.
Yeah, right. It could be corroborated or, debunked. Fabricating specific details can be risky because they're easier to disprove. Vague statements are harder to challenge.
True. So we've got Buckner saying he was in Missouri, but we also have Ashley's testimony alleging the abuse happened in Texas.
Right. Two different sides of the story.
So let's look closer at her testimony. Specifically, the parts that don't quite line up with Buckner's timeline and, this whole Uncle Bobby thing.
Okay, so what are the inconsistencies?
Well, one of the biggest ones is Ashley saying that Buckner picked her up from school, took her to her mom's apartment, and then assaulted her.
But Buckner would have been like 22 at the time, right?
Yeah, and remember that school record?
The one that said Uncle Bobby couldn't pick Ashley up?
That's the one.
Yeah.
And according to Buckner, the school's record keeper even testified that if Buckner had picked Ashley up, there'd be a copy of his driver's license on file.
And was there?
Nope, nothing.
Interesting. So Ashley says Buckner picked her up, but the school records say that's not true. And then we have this record specifically about Uncle Bobby not being allowed to pick her up.
It's a pretty big discrepancy.
Yeah, it is. And, this plus the fact that Uncle Bobby lived with Ashley and was later convicted of the same crime really makes you wonder about Ashley's identification.
Like, could it be that her memory, maybe because of the trauma or just time or even her family's influence, could it be that she mixed up the two Bobbies?
It's definitely a possibility.
And Buckner mentions another detail from Ashley's testimony. She described her abuser as having throat cancer.
Oh, and did Buckner have throat cancer?
No, he didn't. He claims that his lawyer just dismissed it, saying the trial was about Buckner, not someone else.
But wouldn't that be important to look into?
Buckner thought, so he felt like it was crucial to investigate further. If a key part of the victim's description doesn't match the defendant, should that be a red flag?
Absolutely. It could mean the victim's misremembering or that there's someone else who fits the description better. Those little inconsistencies can sometimes point to a bigger problem with the case.
Like a missing puzzle piece.
Right. And for Buckner, that missing piece was Uncle Bobby. His existence and his conviction really made Buckner question everything.
About Ashley's testimony and his own conviction.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what if Buckner's lawyer had looked into that throat cancer detail? Could it have led them to Uncle Bobby?
And changed the whole trial.
We can't know for sure, but it shows how important thorough investigation is. Every detail matters.
So now let's shift gears a bit and talk about Sonia Lopez, Ashley's mother. Buckner's theory is that Sonia might have known the truth about Uncle Bobby, but her mom, Margaret, pressured her to stay quiet.
And Margaret was a key witness for the prosecution.
Right. Buckner describes Sonia as looking really uncomfortable during the trial, like she
Hmm.
is struggling with what was being said.
Makes sense.
He even thinks that Sonia might have been pregnant with his child at the time.
Wow. So he's suggesting that Margaret might have orchestrated this whole thing to protect her own son and keep Buckner away from Sonia and their potential child.
Yeah, that's his theory.
That's a serious accusation.
It is. And, we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions, but it's important to consider all the angles here, right? What were people's motivations?
Hmm.
Could Margaret's desire to protect her son have led her to manipulate the situation?
Influence the trial?
It makes you question Margaret's testimony and if there was any, pressure or coercion within the family. Remember, Margaret was the outcry witness in the case.
The first person Ashley told about the abuse?
Exactly. And her testimony was a big part of the prosecution's case. But what if her account was biased, colored by her own motivations?
Like wanting to protect her son.
And Buckner claims that Margaret initially refused a medical exam for Ashley that could have backed up the allegations.
So if that's true, it raises even more questions about Margaret. Why wouldn't she want a procedure that could prove the abuse? Was she trying to protect someone? Or was there another reason? All these inconsistencies and unanswered questions, it really seems like there's a lot of secrets and potential cover-ups within this family. Like maybe protecting their own became more important than finding out the truth.
Yeah, this deep dive into Bobby Buckner's case has been a wild ride. We've looked at the timelines, really scrutinized the testimonies, and found some pretty unsettling discrepancies.
It's complicated for sure.
As we head into the last part of our deep dive, we're going to look at Buckner's efforts to clear his name from prison and the challenges he's faced.
And what can he do from behind bars?
We'll also talk about what this case means for the justice system as a whole. So stay tuned. There's much more to uncover. So we've seen a lot of inconsistencies and unanswered questions. But what happens when someone like Buckner claims they're innocent? What can they actually do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, proving a wrongful conviction isn't easy. It's a long, tough process, lots of roadblocks along the way.
Buckner talks about this a lot in his writings, that realization that he was basically alone fighting a system that felt like it was working against him.
It's important to think about those systemic issues too, because once you're incarcerated, your access to resources and your ability to advocate for yourself are really limited.
Buckner says that after he learned about Uncle Bobby's arrest and conviction back in 2013, he reached out to both his trial attorney and his appellate attorney.
So he tried to get legal help?
Yeah, he was sure that this new information about Uncle Bobby would change everything. It gave them another suspect, someone who could have done it.
Seems logical you'd think they'd want to look into that.
But Buckner says his trial attorney never even responded.
Wow, so what about the appellate attorney?
He didn't seem interested in pursuing it either.
So he hit a wall. He has this crucial information, but nobody's listening.
It's got to be incredibly frustrating, especially when you're already dealing with being in prison.
Absolutely.
Buckner also mentions that he tried to get a private investigator involved, hoping to dig up more evidence about Uncle Bobby.
Okay, and did that work out?
Not really.
Yeah.
The investigator said he couldn't take a statement from Buckner without a court order.
Oh, wow. So he needs evidence for the court, but he can't get the evidence without a court order.
It's like a catch-22.
It really shows how difficult it is to overturn a wrongful conviction.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many other innocent people are stuck in the same situation.
Right. Unable to get the help they need.
So if the legal options are blocked, what else can someone like Buckner do from inside prison?
In these situations, raising public awareness and getting support from advocacy groups can be really important.
Like the Innocence Project.
Exactly. They do amazing work investigating claims of wrongful conviction and fighting for people who have been wrongly imprisoned.
Social media has also become a powerful tool. Sharing stories like Buckner's can bring attention to the case and maybe even push the authorities to take a second look.
It's a way for people to come together and challenge a system that can feel really overwhelming.
So what does Buckner's story tell us about the criminal justice system as a whole?
Right.
And, where does Ashley fit into all of this?
It's a reminder that even though the justice system aims to be fair, it's not perfect. Mistakes happen, biases exist, memory can be unreliable, and all of that can lead to wrongful convictions.
Right. And with Ashley, her experience shows just how complex childhood trauma is and how memory can be affected, especially after so many years.
It's not about dismissing what Ashley went through. The question is, was the right person held accountable?
Exactly. Buckner's claim of innocence. The problems with the timeline and the fact that Uncle Bobby exists and was convicted of the same crime. All of that means This case deserves another look from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals.
They need to review it thoroughly and impartially.
Justice delayed is justice denied. This deep dive into Bobby Buckner's case has taken us through a lot. The power of memory, the issues with eyewitness testimony, and how human error can have huge consequences.
We've examined the evidence, looked for inconsistencies, and tried to make sense of the unanswered questions.
But maybe the most important takeaway here is the human element. This is a man who, after years in prison, still says he's innocent and is still fighting to clear his name.
It's a powerful story.
We'll leave you with this. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Buckner deserves another chance? What would you do if you were in his shoes? It's something to think about as we all work towards a justice system that truly lives up to its name.